Good evening, everyone, and welcome to programme number 41 in our No2Nato series. My name is Mick Stott, and I'm from the Workers' Party for Britain. And I'm very delighted to welcome tonight's special guests, who are we've got Warren Thornton, who's a journalist and broadcaster. We have Patrick Walsh, who's an Irish political review, part of the Irish Political Review group. We were supposed to have Eddie Liger, who is the Midwestern Marks co-director, joining us, but unfortunately we don't seem to be able to get hold of him. However, we did do some rushes with him and asked him the questions that we're going to be putting to our guests tonight, and so we'll no doubt be able to get some of that footage to you. And the title of tonight's programme, it's a Trump doubleheader, really. Tonight we're going to be asking some very poignant questions of our guests and ask them to discuss the following: what happened at the summit and what were the outcomes of the summit? What was discussed in the Trump meeting in Washington with Zelensky and the EU, where the EU and NATO heads were present, and any outcomes that might have come from that? What do we expect to happen in the future regarding the Trilateral summit between Trump, Putin and Zelensky? And will the EU and NATO try to scupper it? Now, the Trump-Putin main event happened in Alaska on Friday, the 15th of August, which was followed up by the undercard one in Washington, hosted by Trump, involving some key figures from NATO and the EU. Can I welcome Patrick?
Good evening.
Welcome. You're becoming a veteran of this programme, I think, Pat, aren't you?
I am indeed, yes.
So pundits on a Ukrainian TV channel actually discussed whether or not a body double turned up in Alaska instead of Putin. Let's take a quick look at that video, and then we can ask some questions of that, Pat, yeah?
Ну, щодо, ви абсолютно праві щодо здоров'я, тобто цей, ну, дуже такий спортивний дідусь, і він, на мій погляд, молодше виглядає, ніж 72-73 роки. Тому, так, знову, це показник, тому що оригінал бункерний пересувається дуже важко. Ну, такій от відстані, ну, він там, взагалі, Путін пройшов там більш ніж 100 метрів, на мій погляд, то і пройшов, ну, без яких питань. Щодо зросту, ну, розумієте, можливо, у двійників я так за зростом не слідкую, я слідкую за зростом оригіналу, і оригінал там для нього шьють спеціальне взуття, яке допомагає бути більш високим. І, до речі, воно не настільки помітно, ну, наприклад, як жіночі підбори, що воно ось от зроблено спеціально для цього. Тому тут може бути. Ну, а коли все ж таки, коли є двійники, то там зі зростом можуть бути варіації. Тому я на це, перепрошую, уваги не звертаю.
Pat, here's the question. Was it Putin that turned up? And why do you think there is always a constant talk of Putin body doubles being used?
I think it's sort of just rather like primitive black propaganda, to be honest. Well, I mean, if we even look at the logic of the situation, if you brought a body double, they couldn't exactly talk to Trump for 2 hours on the issues involved. I think it's one of those types of things that might have existed in the Soviet world, and it's a sort of like a remnant of this idea that there's always people like the KGB trying to kid you and stuff like this. But I mean, from another point of view, I did read one time that Churchill had a body double thing, but I think this occasion it's just a far out conspiracy type theory.
That's thank you for that, Pat. And of course, I've been involved in a number of situations being military, and of course the British military always prided themselves on being great at psychological operations, and body doubles always seem to fit the bill because they raise a lot of questions and can often create a bit of confusion. And of course, when people are confused, they're highly suggestible. So can I now welcome Warren to the broadcast?
Hello.
Hey, Warren, how are you? Okay?
Absolutely fine. Thank you, Michael. Hello, Patrick.
And what's your take on the question that we've just asked to Patrick?
It is the usual nonsense that you get. I mean, anything that literally comes out of Ukrainian TV or from Ukraine, you can pretty much dismiss with a pinch of salt. I mean, these are the people who say that they've only lost 40,000 troops since the start of the conflict. I mean, anything that comes out of there is more or less something that's coming out of fantasy land. So the idea that Putin in some way is a body double is to me absolutely laughable.
Thank you for that, Warren. I thought you might say that. And Warren, staying with you, Sergei Lavrov rocked up at the summit wearing a CCP shirt. Why? What do you make of that? And what do you think the media response has been like around that?
Well, once again, it's the media going absolutely crazy, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, you know, you get Zelensky turning up looking like he just stepped out of a funeral for a massive meeting. You know, at the White House and everything else. Remember when Sergei Lavrov was wearing this T-shirt? He was wearing this T-shirt, was going into his hotel room. He wasn't taking part in any meetings or anything like that. So the double standards surrounding that nonsense, once again, is more noise from the Western media, who the moment Putin stepped off the plane, they were happy to try and call everybody warmongers and everything else, almost as though you would think the mainstream media didn't want peace.
And do you have anything to add to that, Pat?
Well, only that I heard that Lavrov was questioned about this in the media there, I think it's today. And he made the point, you know, that the CCP, the Soviet Union, was a proud part of Russian history. It was essentially, it wasn't, the West will project this as being a sort of Russian imperialism, Russian empire. But actually, he pointed to the fact that the Soviet Union, the CCP, represented brotherhood amongst nations and, you know, fraternity amongst Russian people and Ukrainian people. And he said there was no reason why I shouldn't wear a T-shirt with essentially this message to everybody when we're about to make peace.
Yeah. Can I just add to that as well, Michael? It's very, very simply that there is a video out there of Putin and the Americans having a joke about that very thing. And of course, Putin turned around and said he'd make a gift of it to Marco Rubio. And of course, they were all laughing about it. And then Putin pointed at Lavrov and went, "You can't trust these imperialists, you know." So they were just taking it with a pinch of salt and laughing at it. Really.
Yeah. Okay, back to you, Patrick. Putin received the red carpet treatment, I reckon, when he arrived in Alaska. What did you make of that? And the media and Zelensky frenzy over it. What's your take on that?
Well, I think, you know, Trump's a sort of master of theatrics, really, you know, master of theatre. And he was really sort of making a point there that, you know, he was doing business with somebody he could do business with. And it was very clear that there was a very big difference between the reception that Putin got and the Europeans got. The Europeans looked very downcast. They looked like they'd spent a couple of hours, you know, in a waiting room, and essentially they weren't very, very happy at all. And they weren't given the 5-star treatment that Putin was. And I think, you know, this was probably deliberate on the part of Trump, because, as I say, he's a reality TV man. He's a theatrical sort of person, and he likes to make points symbolically and pictorially and visually. And I think there was a message there for the Europeans that Putin was no longer in the wilderness, let's put it like that. He was very much part of the deal and the deal that was going to be done.
Warren, you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I have. I mean, when the red carpet came out, we had somebody called Mega Moobs or Mega Mobs come out and turn around and say it was terrible that American soldiers put down a red carpet for Putin. Now, what you have to remember is Mega Mobs is Keith Kellogg's daughter, who was literally not, Kellogg was not allowed anywhere near the peace negotiations. And of course, this is a woman who, with, shall we say, a massive equity firm, runs a laughable charity, which is an NGO, which repatriates the bodies of dead American mercenaries, repatriated that are fighting against Russia back to America. So what we're talking about on one hand here is the government trying to, or Trump trying to broker a peace deal. And people even like Kellogg's daughter, who are coming out and saying stuff like this, who are so invested in keeping this war going, and more Ukrainians dying. It seems a very odd thing that the media, you would think they would want peace, because it's only going to get worse for Ukraine. They seem to want to allow this to happen.
Warren, if we could stay with you, I wonder if you could summarise what might have been discussed in the Trump-Putin meeting and any potential outcomes.
Yeah, well, the ceasefire was taken off the table straight away. The Minsk agreements were basically, I mean, they were trounced all over by Ukraine. And of course, we had Mitterrand and of course, Merkel turned around and said the only reason we agreed to the Minsk agreements was to have time to arm Ukraine. So very simply, they were not going to fall for a Minsk 3. Ceasefire was off the table. And they are absolutely right. What the Russians have done there is they've turned around and said, well, let's have a full peace agreement on the three main ideals. Now, the three main factors are that they wanted a demilitarization, they wanted no Ukraine in NATO, and they're still bickering about that, saying, well, Article 5, and there is a pathway to Ukraine, it's just not on the table for NATO at the moment. So none of the Europeans are genuine about this, but nobody, absolutely nobody, is talking about the third thing that the Russians want, which is the denazification, which is basically, I mean, you look at Sersky, if you see Sersky, he's actually on the patch, he's the closest guy to Zelensky, on the patch of his arm, he's got the 2 cross grenades, which are from the Derwanger SS battalions. So this neo-Nazi thing, people are not understanding that the Russians absolutely detest anything to do with Nazis whatsoever. It sets them off quite badly. And that is a situation that's not even being discussed, let alone addressed. The NATO situation is being addressed. The idea of how much weapons can they have and everything else is being addressed, but nobody's really giving ground. So to be honest with you, the Russians haven't moved at all, and the Americans now are playing the peacekeepers. And of course, these peacekeepers actually started the war, so they're not really peacekeepers at all. They're trying to get out of it and leave Europe holding the ball while they go off to China in late 2027.
And the same question to you, Pat, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, I think, you know, if we sum it up overall, the other thing that was off the table was the sanctions, secondary sanctions. Obviously, Trump realized this was unworkable and it was going to make China, India and Russia cohere. So this was a very misplaced demand that he made, and I think these come off the table. But overall, I think what was sort of happening is that Trump and Putin were finding a formula that would actually assist both the United States and Russian national interests. And what they did is, I mean, how does this assist the US interest? It's facilitating the US stepping away from the war without admitting defeat. I mean, that's essentially what's happening. And the secondary point to that is the fact that Trump is probably saying to the Europeans, if you want to continue fighting the war, you can do so. You're welcome, essentially, and you can take responsibility for this and see what happens when you take responsibility. And the other aspect is that this might be true, I'm not certain about it, but Russia is obviously there to obtain a reasonable settlement, or if it doesn't, it will continue to advance. And I think that has been said to the Ukrainians and the Europeans. But I mean, basically, at the end of the day, Trump knows that you can use certain messages to influence the other side's behavior, and that's what he's doing. He's trying to impress these ideas upon particularly the Ukrainians and the Europeans, who are really the obstacles to a settlement at this point.
And Pat, staying with you, if this had been a boxing match at any levels, who do you think might have won the bout, Trump or Putin, and why?
Well, I mean, I think the Western press itself is very much unanimous that Putin gave Trump the runaround. I don't think Putin would ever want to say a thing like that because he wants Trump to feel like that he's the arbiter, the facilitator of peace, and perhaps getting the peace prize at the end of the day. I mean, Putin's he's not stupid. He knows that he has to butter up Mr. Trump. But I think the Western press knows that that Trump is dealing with a superior being when he's dealing with Putin. And in fact, I think that Putin told him the reality of the situation in Alaska, and by hearing the reality, Trump has adjusted his main positions. That's what I think anyway, especially over the idea of the ceasefire as against the settlement and over secondary sanctions.
And Warren, can I ask you the same question, please? Have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I hate to be an echo chamber, but Patrick's absolutely right there. Putin won it hands down. They didn't make any concessions whatsoever, no matter what people are saying. And of course, he's turned up on Alaskan soil, and he even controlled the press conference. I don't know whether you saw, but when he actually stood up to go onto the podium when they were getting off the airplane, you had some stupid woman shouting out her activism, are you going to stop killing children and everything else? And Putin cupped his hand to his ear and smiled at the woman. And basically, you knew then Putin works a room really, really well. And you knew full well then Putin had literally decided you're not getting any questions after this conference, after we've said what we're going to say, because we can't talk to you people. In Russia, they do the press conference is different. The hand goes up, a press conference between two world leaders of that size is not a place for your activism to scream out all sorts of accusations. Ask your question by all means, but make it sensible, polite. Russians don't do the screaming, yelling match that we do in the West. It was at that moment you literally knew there was going to be no questions after for the press, and you can put that down to her.
And Warren, what did you make of the undercard event in Washington involving Trump, NATO and the EU? Who were the victors in that one, do you think?
Well, Trump, without a doubt, he just basically told the EU what is going to happen. They all went with an agenda. I mean, the fact that Zelensky had to have 5 or 6 minders with him was just incredible. At the end of the day, it's got nothing to do with the EU. They blindly followed America into this war. Their economies are in the toilet. They need this war to continue. So they'll try and scupper it. Now, each one went with an agenda. Maloney went with the Article 5, but she looked fairly uncomfortable being there. Ursula von der Leyen went there with a ridiculous thing about the children and everything else. There are actually more children that Ukraine have sent to the West, by 10 times more than the Russians actually have. And they're saying on a case-by-case basis, we'll return them to the parents when you produce the parents, which is absolutely fine. But Ursula von der Leyen came with that. Keir Starmer came with a different agenda. Merz was still coming with the ceasefire now. So they all had their separate roles to play. But at the end of the day, they are literally being told what they can do. And of course, in that phone call with Putin, Putin avoided, he doesn't want to meet Zelensky because it gives Zelensky legitimacy. He is not currently he's de facto the president of Ukraine, but he's not the elected one because his term of office is over. Putin knows if he meets with Zelensky and Trump, this legitimizes Zelensky, and he's going to try and avoid doing that, as much as he can. And he did that on the phone call. He said, no, that won't be happening.
What's your take on that, Pat?
Well, definitely the Europeans were put in their place, and they came, when you think about it, they could have came to Washington to, have a fight over principle, but they didn't. They decided to concede to Trump and basically take it, and make the best of it. And, what we've been hearing over the last day or so in the British media is this type of making the best of it, trying to work out these sort of ways that it can be suggested that the war has been somehow won or some sort of thing like this. I heard a commentator on Radio 4 this morning from some think tank in Britain saying that that Russia had lost the war, and they're still coming out with this narrative. It's just unbelievable, but when I heard this statement about Russia had lost the war, and he explained it, And basically, it had no it had no feeling for the Ukrainians. Ukrainians were just seen as instruments. In other words, the Russians have lost a lot of people. They've expended a lot of our resources on this war, so we've won. Oh, but we don't care too much about the Ukrainians. We don't care many of them. They're dead, 100, 200, 300, 400,000, whatever it is. I don't know, because they don't give us the figure. But, you know, it was so cynical, absolutely cynical attitude that they take. And I think the Europeans have been left high and dry now. You know, they're in a position that, you know, they've got to put up or shut up. And they're going to shut up, I would say. You know, you see all this manoeuvring from Britain. Some of the British military people are saying things like, "Oh yeah, we're willing to support the Ukrainians, but maybe not in the front line, because if in the front line we might actually be killed by the Russians, and that would be a diplomatic incident, and we'd be a bit, what could we do?" You know, you can see the thinking going back in the head, because it's ridiculous. The whole thing is ridiculous. Unless they put up. And I think Trump knows this. And I think he's going to hang them out to dry, hopefully,
Great
anyway.
take on that. And I agree with the virtue signaling and the posturing. It's easy to posture when you're about 50, when you're 50 miles behind the forward edge of the battle area, right? So Warren, over to you. Trump wants to have a trilateral summit meeting involving himself, Putin, and President Zelensky. Do you think that's going to happen? And if it does, how do you see things going as a result of that?
I think he's going to avoid that like the plague. As I said, that gives him legitimacy. You've got Zelensky on the world stage as an unelected leader who is not, you know, he's losing roughly 1,600 men a day. Over the course of 1,100 days, that works out at about 1.8 million dead. That's not injured, that's dead. Now, everybody says, oh, that's a fantastic figure, but we've been saying that figure for ages. Now, when you think about it, the front line is 1,000 miles, literally the length of 1,000 miles. Now, that's only 1.6 Ukrainians per day per mile. And when you turn around and you think the Russians can lob 20 times more shells in a day than Ukraine do, that is not a great deal of people. So that figure, whilst it sounds fantastic, actually isn't. It sounds quite small. And we've got people who've been on the ground since 1988 giving us the figures, and they've always been correct through Sierra Leone, the Iraq war, absolutely every war they've been in. Their figures have been spot on, and they're saying it's 1.8 million dead. They're saying 750,000. So Putin doesn't need, they're saying 750,000 injured. So Putin doesn't need this to happen quickly. Putin, the longer it goes, the worse Ukraine's situation gets. They have 1 million men. They're now, and that was in January, they had 1 million men, and they're losing 1,600 a day on the front line. They're now press ganging. Just remember this, they're press ganging 60-year-old civilians to go on the front line with no training. That is quite incredible. And of course, Putin knows this. He's in no hurry for a meeting, and he certainly doesn't want to legitimize somebody who declared martial law. He's not actually the elected leader of Ukraine, because suddenly that makes him a world figure, and that's the last thing that Putin would want. He'll meet him individually, he'll meet Trump individually, but a trilateral, unless he's getting everything he wants, there's no chance of that.
Patrick, do you have a perspective on that?
Well, I think, Trump says some things on the lines of, Mr. Zelensky and Mr. Putin can get together and sort this out. I mean, this is a sort of fantasy sort of thing. I mean, really, what that's all about is the fact that Trump is trying to wash his hands of the situation and to sort of try to pretend that the US is not really a participant in this at all, and has really had nothing to do with it. It's like a sort of quarrel between these two men far away that Trump is going to solve because he's a magic peacemaker, as if the United States has absolutely nothing to do with it. So, I mean, this is just nonsense. It's not going to happen. And as Warren said, it's probably very unlikely that Putin's going to give, Zelensky a sort of equal status well, he isn't really a legitimate leader. The only thing I could say that if I was going to be really cynical about this, and let's say that there was a sort of a meeting between Trump and Putin and Zelensky, I think there might have been a discussion, but I'm speculating here, between Putin and Trump that, Zelensky, we're going to try Zelensky to get a deal across the line type of thing. If he fails and they overthrow him, then we can deal with the people that overthrow him in certain ways, because we can say, whatever against them. It's a possible that they'll use Zelensky as a fall guy. I don't know. But if they were being cynical, and I don't think being cynical is beyond Donald Trump anyway, they might do this. But as I say, as Warren said, I think it's unlikely that Putin's going to give Zelensky equal status.
And staying with you, Patrick, I mean, we've talked, it's a hypothetical situation, but let's imagine that it did happen. What do you think NATO or the EU would try to do? Would they try to scupper it? And how would they do that if they were going to do that, and why?
Well, they are trying to scupper it already. I mean, they're trying to pull out all the stops, put out all the obstructions, put out all the sorts of roadblocks in the way. But, they're dealing with Trump, and Trump wants a deal. He's focused. He doesn't really care too much about what the deal involves, but essentially he wants to come out of it with a deal. And of course, that's going to be a problem for them at the end of the day. I was going to say another thing there about that was that, at the end of the day, as I say, Europe is going to be in a position whereby they have to decide what they're going to do when this happens. So this is going to be very, very tricky for them. So I think that's what's happening. And honestly, I can't. They are trying to obstruct a deal. What can they do against it? I don't know. They probably in their heart of hearts, they hope they can last out Trump. They can hope, and some of the worst elements probably hope that, Ukrainian nationalists will be provocative and restart the war, and they can get the US re-involved again. That's their last resort, sort of last card thing. And I think that's possibly why the British don't want to be in the front line, because they realize that the Ukrainian nationalists, who are a real hard line, a lot of nutcases, to be honest, who would want to die for every inch of Ukraine and not really care what Ukrainian people do. I think at the end of the day, they're worried about this. They're worried about the Ukrainian nationalists restarting the war, which I think is pretty inevitable. So this is how they're going to try and obstruct it.
Final thoughts from you, Warren, on the same question.
Yeah, very, very simply, you notice whenever they're going to have any sort of meeting or a peace summit, or they're going to get together and have a chat, these lunatic nationalists, they launch attacks at civilians inside Russia. This has happened every single time. And the problem that we have, of course, is Patrick is completely right. These nationalists, as he says, or neo-Nazis, as they would call them, these are Azov battalion. Now, remember that they pretty much were very small to start with. Now they've grown exponentially. They've got training camps for kids and everything else. I mean, this is very much like Germany back in the 1930s. And the problem that you have is when you had the Minsk agreements, you knew they were going to be broken, because at the end of the day, these nationalists, as Patrick said, are going to go across into the Eastern Donbass and kill ethnic Russians, because this is, for them, this is an ideology. It is not just a fact of that seems to be my enemy. Ideologically, they absolutely hate Russians, and therefore, if there are ethnic Russians in the east of Ukraine, they're going to go and kill them. So any peace deal you put on the table, unless you've dealt with that nationalism or neo-Nazism first, is doomed to failure. Absolutely doomed to fail.
Well,
can I just say one other thing there related to what Warren just said? There's actually a book out. It's just come out. It's a translation. I don't know if people are aware of this. It's a translation from the French by an author called Benoît Paré. Right? It's called. It's actually available on Amazon now. It's called "What I Saw in Ukraine," And Pare was OSCE, right? He was a monitor of the situation in Ukraine from 2012 to 2020. And in that book, he describes how the most of the provocative behavior was done from the Ukrainian side. And basically, they were the aggressors in the war. He came to this conclusion. He's a Frenchman who served with the OSCE, and he's written a book about his experiences. And he goes into great statistics. He analysed statistically the casualties, the shelling. They used satellites and looked at nighttime footage and stuff like this to see the levels of movement. And his conclusion essentially is that the Ukrainians were the aggressors in the war, and they were acting in parallel with the CIA to lure Russia into Ukraine, where they were going to be bled dry. And that was the objective. And he came to this conclusion as an objective Frenchman, as part of the OSCE, the monitoring group between, and he says the same things about the Minsk agreements. He said they were broken entirely by Ukraine, not by Russia. They refused to ratify the agreement on autonomy for the Donbass in the parliament when a massive mob showed up in Kiev outside the parliament and threw hand grenades into it, killing 4 people, including 3 policemen. He goes into great detail. It's a 600-page book. It's available on Amazon, I think, from this week. It's called What I Saw in Ukraine. If you put it in there, you'll find it.
Okay, Eddie, based on what you've just seen, was it Putin that turned up? And why do you think there is always this constant talk of Putin body doubles?
I'm not sure. It's an interesting talking point from the media. I know that Western intelligence agencies like the CIA have a long history of using body doubles and crisis actors. Maybe it would have been smart for Russia to use a Putin body double, considering the U.S. flew those F-15s over his head, I believe. So I'm not sure if I buy it. That Russia sent a fake body double of Putin, and I don't buy much from the Ukrainian media these days, but you never know.
Absolutely. I mean, when you start to believe the mainstream media, that's going to have its benefits and definitely its consequences, Eddie, yeah? Now,
yeah.
Of course, Sergei Lavrov rocked up at the summit wearing a CCP shirt. Why do you think he did that?
I think there could be a couple of reasons for that. It's very interesting to see the man behind Russia's foreign policy, showing nostalgia for the Soviet Union. It could serve as a reminder to the United States and to the West, the collective West, of what Russia used to be, what they once were, and when if the Soviet Union had never fell, there would have never needed to be a special military operation. The Soviet Union would have gone in much sooner and crushed any kind of fascist government that tried to take power in Ukraine and start a civil war. So it's a reminder to the West of what Russia once was with the Soviet Union. And it also shows that, that legacy is still alive and well in Russia. The memory of the Soviet Union is alive, and it affects their foreign policy today. And then, of course, it's a message to Ukraine saying, without Lenin, essentially, you would have never even existed. And we once lived, basically as one society, as one people. And now you're fighting this horrific civil war led by these CIA-funded, U.S. NATO-backed Nazi militias in Ukraine. And it's a reminder that, the Soviet Union isn't completely dead in Russia, I think.
I think you might be right, Eddie. And of course, Putin received the red carpet treatment when he arrived in Alaska. What did you make of that? And of course, the media and the Zelensky frenzy over it all. What is your take on that?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of style over substance, which is typical of the Trump administration. He's made these grand promises to the American people who are tired of funding the NATO-backed proxy war against Russia that's going on in Ukraine. They're tired of seeing their tax dollars sent there. And Trump also recently, or somewhat recently, did a very performative sort of dressing down of Zelensky, a scolding of Zelensky in the Oval Office in the U.S. So he's playing as if he's going to create a deal with Russia and bring peace and put Zelensky and the Ukrainian regime in their place, but not much has actually really changed. The working lunch that was supposed to happen between Trump and Putin at this meeting ended up being canceled. They didn't end up actually coming to any kind of deal, so it was light on substance but heavy on style and flair, which is, again, I think typical of the Trump administration.
Absolutely. I think they come from a perspective as a business organization, and it's all about marketing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Forget that. Let's focus on the marketing. So Eddie, can you summarize what was discussed in the Trump-Putin meeting and the outcomes that came from that?
Yeah, I don't know like the nitty-gritty details of what was discussed. I don't know if anybody knows. We had one of my comrades from the American Communist Party, Chris Halali, our international secretary, was in Russia covering this. And he said that the negotiations were going decently at first, but then it caused a big stir when a dinner was canceled. I believe a lunch was canceled, and a lot of the conferences where they were supposed to be nailing down the details of a deal ended up being canceled. What I think probably happened is Trump went in asking for an unrealistic solution, asking Russia to give back the Donbass region or, any of these regions that they've sacrificed so much, so many resources for and sacrificed people for, and that, it's a war that the vast majority of their people support as well. So it's just unrealistic to think that they would just give back that territory, especially when that territory is ethnically Russian and wanted to be part of Russia in the first place, and were being shelled by these, NATO-backed Ukrainian Nazis. So it's unrealistic for Russia to give that territory back, and I have a feeling that Trump is asking for too much. That's kind of his art of the deal, is to ask for way too much and then negotiate down. But I'd love to know the exact details of what was discussed.
And of course, that's one of the oldest sales techniques in the book, isn't it? If you ask for a Rolls Royce, you might end up with a Mini, right?
Right.
As long as you get something. Who do you believe might have won the boat, Eddie, when you think about the Trump and Putin meet? Which team do you think might have won, and why? Why would you think that?
Which team might have won the
boat?
The vote.
Yeah, the meet between Trump and Putin. Who do you think came out on
top? It's hard to say. I mean, it's Trump is still agreeing to send more weapons and money to Ukraine. So in that way, Putin's not getting what he wants. But at the same time, the Ukrainian regime continues to lose ground and lose territories. So, Russia is winning that in the long run. But I don't know if I can call a winner on this most recent negotiation. It was kind of a stalemate, it seems to me.
I mean, would you think that the messages from this meet might differ depending on the country and the mainstream media that present it within each country?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm sure in Russia, some of the media is portraying it as a big win, or rightfully pointing out to the belligerence of the United States and Ukraine and their inability to make a real compromise, which I think is much more accurate than the narrative we're going to be fed here in the Western media, which is, the liberals are hysterical that Trump would even meet with Putin because they're such incredible war hawks that they, think we should drop bombs before meeting with other countries' leaders. And the conservative media will, of course, portray it as a huge win for Trump. But yeah, that it's funny how the media narratives vary by country.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? They do say that the victors write history, and the phrase is quite correct when it says his story. What do you make of the undercard event in Washington, Eddie, involving Trump, NATO, and the EU?
Yeah, was that where they met with Zelensky?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not sure the specifics of what went on there, but as long as the NATO heads are involved, it's not good. I highly doubt Trump is going to follow through on his campaign promises of ending this war if he's, going into meetings with Zelensky with these NATO heads who have been pushing for this war and the architects of this war from the beginning. Also, U.S. intelligence agencies, and there are other arms of Western imperialism involved, but it's largely a NATO-installed regime and a NATO-backed war. So as long as they're involved, I don't think anything productive is going to come out of it.
And might have been a victor in that one, do you think? And if so, who do you think that might have been?
NATO. I'd say the victor is the NATO heads, because this guy, this fake tough guy, fake revolutionary Trump promised to end their war. And now he's doing their bidding. He's going into meetings with them like a little sheep. So,
yeah, absolutely. Of course, Trump wants to have a trilateral summit involving himself, President Putin, and Zelensky. Do you think it's going to happen?
That would be something to see for sure. I don't think so. I listened to Zelensky on a podcast recently, like a 3-hour podcast, and it was hard to listen to. He's so belligerent, bordering on completely racist against the Russian people. The world, as Zelensky sees it, is black and white. Russians are evil supervillains, and Ukrainians are the defenders of democracy and freedom and everything good in the world. There's no room for nuance in that guy's brain, which is the exact kind of puppets that the U.S. likes to install, or NATO likes to install in these countries. So, I don't see it happening. Zelensky was asked in the podcast I listened to if he would ever sit down with Putin, and he's like, no, the Russian people hate us. I would never sit down with Russians. It's just so belligerent, and even racist. So I don't see it happening, but Trump likes to make big promises and never follow through.
And of course, just the final question, Eddie, really is, if this meeting was to take place, what do you think the reaction of NATO and the EU to it would be? What do you think their take on this would be?
I think their minds would be blown. I think they would be furious that the meeting was even happening. I'm sure they would encourage Trump and Zelensky to not give an inch to Putin and not compromise at all. And it's really crazy watching, the EU be on board with this war even more so than like the American public. I don't know, you would know better than me how much resistance there is to it among, the grassroots, among the working class. But the political class seems to be totally on board with the proxy war in a way that even some people in the American political class are not questioning. So that's interesting to see, especially because it seems like seems like the Europeans kind of shooting themselves in the foot by just, going along with these sanctions against Russia and closing themselves off economically to NATO's enemies. I don't fully understand it.
Well, Eddie, I'm in total agreement with you, and my take on that is that pretty much the message we get from the working class is whatever the mainstream media wants us to hear, and that's going to be governed. We have a very old saying in the military: generals speak to generals, and there is always a need to know basis. So if people that run the politics believe that we don't need to know, then there's a good chance we're never going to find out, right? So, Eddie, I would like to thank you for being on the show tonight, and really appreciate your perspective. I'm sure that everyone that's listened to this will thoroughly appreciate it as well. So, thank you. Pat and Warren, thank you so much for joining us again. Always informative and interesting. And I'm sure that anyone watching will get an awful lot from tonight's program. Thank you.